So what's the truth? I guess we'll have to find out. Let's do that. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about Discworld, and in particular today we're here to talk about The Truth, book 25 in publication order of Terry Pratchett's massive Discworld series. This was part of our ongoing Discworld read-along, and it will be followed by Thief of Time, which is book 26 in publication order. So if you feel like joining us for the next one, which will happen sometime in January, you have time to catch up some, and this one will be about death and Susan and things like that. And yeah, it's a good book, so go read it. And now we're going to talk about The Truth. I'll give a quick synopsis and general spoiler-free reasons on why you should definitely go and read this book, because I believe it's one of the best Discworld novels. It's also one that I would say has only gotten more relevant with age, which is pretty cool. And then we'll go into some detailed, spoiler-ish discussion of what this book does exceptionally well, and just, things that I feel like talking about. So that's what we're going to do today, so let's get started. Alright. The Truth is a new book, the start of a new series, if you will, or a standalone in the Discworld timeline and Discworld publication order, because it features as its main character William the Word, founder of the first newspaper of Discworld, of Ankh-Morpork, the Ankh-Morpork Times. And it is sometimes called part of the Discworld industrialization sub-series, but those have different characters. So yeah, it's basically a standalone, and it deals with the introduction of print, like type, individual type printing, and it deals with the founding of the newspaper or general mass media and its impact on society and how to deal with, well, the truth and conspiracies and all of these kind of things. Well, I guess it's a very good start if you feel like starting with a standalone. It talks about a lot of relevant, currently relevant topics in an interesting way, and it is one of the most well-rounded Discworld novels out there in just the way it integrates all the different aspects and strengths of Terry Pratchett's writing. The jokes, the political commentary, the plot, all of these elements just tie in extremely well in this one. And it has a lot of in-jokes for those who are old hands at Discworld, so yeah, it's just a really good book. And if you ever wanted to talk about what's truth, what's lies, who wants to hear the truth, even if it doesn't really touch upon our individual lives or so forth, go read this book. It's actually really, really, really good. Plus, it has Pulp Fiction jokes, and, that's also pretty neat. Anyway, as I said, one of the best, of the, I guess, strongest time in Discworld publication order, and you should definitely go and read it. I've said enough on that topic, so let's go read it and then talk about spoilerish things. You ready? Perfect. Let's get down to business then. All right. So let's continue with what I said about why I think this is one of the best integrated, well-rounded Discworld novels, and then we go into some themes later on. So, what I said about the last one, when we talked about The Fifth Elephant, is already that we have entered a new phase in Discworld, where Terry Pratchett has finally managed to actually combine all his strengths, all his different elements into a very specific, well, in a way that does not weigh heavy on one. Like early Discworld is very heavy on the jokes and, say, the parody of other genres and so forth. We then reach a time where it becomes way more political, but still doesn't necessarily have really strong plots. And now we've reached the point where the actual plot, the characterizations, the jokes, the politics, it all works extremely well, and Pratchett is at the top of his game, even in very small details. There's callbacks, there's really neat foreshadowing, there's really small details that in early Discworld novels weren't necessarily there because Pratchett wasn't really interested in that level of detail, I guess. And I feel this one, the last one, and some of the upcoming ones will be, the prime examples of what Terry Pratchett, at his best, was capable of. And I just feel that's interesting. So let's look at some of these small things that he does in these recent books that I feel added to his craft, just on like the craft side of things, beyond the plot and the politics and so forth. There is the running gag. Now, obviously, he's used those before, but he's going deeper on those. And in this book in particular, it's the headline of the Times, which is, the Ankh-Morpork Times, "The truth shall make ye free." And throughout the book, every time we have a different edition of the Times, there's always a different typo on that top. It's sometimes "the truth shall make ye fret," or "frep," or "fret." It goes around, and I do really appreciate that, because it's a very minute detail, and you might not even notice it, especially if you're reading the printed book and not listening to the audiobook, where those are actually, printed as images, which is really cool. So there you go. That's one of those really clever things where you have these callbacks that come up again and again, and they're super minute, but they add a certain level of depth, I guess. Because if you don't notice those things, they don't matter at all. Another one is like a really subtle foreshadowing, and Pratchett took a while to actually figure out how to do foreshadowing in his books. Roughly at around Guards is when this kind of thing happens for the first time, but we've reached like levels of nuance and subtlety that showed up the last time in The Fifth Elephant, when he sets up the whole not murder, like the death of Wolfgang by, having all these separate elements. And we have an even subtler one here. So here's something when we know that our two main bad guys, well, sort of at least the henchmen of the bad guys, Tulip and Pin, want to be paid in jewels. And we have those morning conversations at Mrs. Arcanum, is that her name? At William's lodgings, we have the morning conversations, and we have one of them being a salesman who mentions, by the by, that there are some strange events happening in the jewels market, because they want to be, paid in jewels. So suddenly jewel prices are going up because someone is buying up all those jewels to pay the criminals. Does that need to be mentioned? No, but it shows Discworld, a world that is particularly, humorous. It does not necessarily have to apply, doesn't necessarily have to use the same rules that go for our world, because stuff can just be explained away, right? It uses those levels of detail that we don't see in a lot of other novels, just as a small detail, and it's like, wow, that's really clever, and it's not necessarily something I would notice all the time, and that's just really, really, really good. So, what else do we have? Well, we have the usual strength. We have some incredibly clever, or not so clever, or not so subtle pop culture references. As I said, we have a lot of Pulp Fiction jokes in this one, which that's pretty cool. You can just tell that apparently Pratchett just watched Pulp Fiction, was really happy about it, and really enjoyed it, I guess. We have really dumb wordplay, like really terrible puns, which I absolutely love, with the sausage situation when when William meets Dibbler, and Dibbler complains about the trade, and he's like, "You can't make both ends meet," which, is really clever, and then he still acknowledges how really bad the pun is in the next sentence, which, yeah, I get it. I like it. It's really cool. So the humorous side is back in a way that it maybe wasn't during the rather dark Fifth Elephant, and that's why it's extremely well rounded. So let's look at the plot. Well, the plot is pretty clever as well, right? It's a rather complex sort of political conspiracy thing going on, and it is. Well, it's obviously slightly inspired by Watergate, so there's that. But it is, it's a rather convoluted plot that happens, and it shows how certain things can only be discovered by what you might call a free press. because journalists can do things that the law sometimes can't really do, and that's at the key. That's like at the core of this story is the interplay between the justice system, the legal system on the one hand, and media or journalism on the other hand, in a way to keep a society safe, so to speak. A society, well, yeah, safe is the term that is important here, and I think that's what makes this book so good, because the whole plot of framing Lord Vetinari to be well, a criminal, which he isn't, to get rid of him, to then, move society in a way that some people want it. That's really clever, and the way it is discovered through informants and tips from the police and so forth, it shows the workings of a functioning democracy in what is a tyranny, because, Lord Vetinari is an absolute ruler, but still, it shows the workings of a functioning society. And that, rings really true when you look at how things are nowadays and are, yeah, it should be, So let's look at all of these elements and see what is going on there, because I think that's the other part. It is not pointing fingers just at one thing. It shows a lot of the interplay that makes it easy to attack a more or less free society if you have nefarious plans, and that's the thing that I found so interesting and so strong about this book, that has, as I said, only grown in relevance, I would argue. So let's look at who is the enemy of that free society. The enemy of that free society in Discworld are racist, rich elites. To put it, we know who they are, and they want to come to a society, want to change Ankh-Morpork into a place where there are less dwarves and trolls and other minorities, because they're racist. Well, they're speciesist in Pratchett terms, because it's different species, but we know what is meant here. And those are the enemies of freedom. And it's very important to understand that this is an attack from the right. From the right. But it's also made very clear that this group is attacking out of fear, in a way, because they're losing their power. It's loss of privilege that leads to the right striking at the heart of it, at the heart of the state, which means, well, framing the ruler, actually trying to undermine the authority of government. Now, does that ring true in a lot of ways? Yeah, it does. So that's part of the problem, and why I think this is so incredibly relevant these days. Now, the other side of that is, of course, that there are people that either don't care about, well, government and the running of society, or people that share that fear because they are losing their smaller level of privilege. That's the dark thing behind it, right? It's you have rich elites manipulating those poor people that are already suffering to go along by stoking their fear and, well, feeding their suspicion in a lot of ways. Which obviously shows that there is a disconnect between those in power and the disenfranchised. It's that disconnect that I think lies at the heart of the crisis of media, which is exactly what this book is about. Even though media only starts at that point, right? It's the idea that no matter what happens up there, us down here don't have any effect on it anyway, so who cares whether the rulers are corrupt or not? We might just assume they are corrupt, because we can't change it anyway. That's that form of belief, and that inertia, that level of not doing anything about it because we can never change it. That's the biggest enemy of freedom there, the not caring, the despondency. And I feel this book shows that very clearly in what is still a fantasy comedy at its core. Which leads us to the next part. Well, authority in media and so forth. See, we have that whole plot of moving type being, finally put into Discworld, and it's really cool to see that sort of technology in a lot of ways. And Pratchett makes funny jokes about C-commerce, because the clacks being, the semaphores, C-commerce instead of e-commerce, and so forth. There's a lot of funny things going on there, which I do appreciate. But at its core, the idea is, which kind of news do we trust? Why do we trust them? And how does that work? And Pratchett, I think, lays his finger on something there that is really important. See, there's, on the one hand, the discussion between what he calls news and olds, and that's really cool. But there's a key thing in there that I feel is, well, something that we need to talk about when we talk about social media nowadays as well. And this is already going far afield, I'm aware of that. But see, here's the thing. Whenever people look at newspapers, they're like, yeah, it has to be true because it's in the papers, because they wouldn't be allowed to put it there if it weren't true. And this, ominous they, I think, is the interesting thing, because we tend to trust or distrust media because we assume there is someone behind all of it, making decisions, calling the shots, and that's the issue, right? It's that the tendency to assume a conspiracy that is guiding media is so tightly connected to the authority of media. It's like, it really depends on whether you trust them or whether you distrust them. But so many of us assume that there is a them. And Pratchett makes it very clear that there is no them. And it really boils down to the integrity of the people doing journalism, to the integrity of journalism. And that's where the big conflict between, the Times and the Inquirer is. Now, obviously, this is about newspapers, and there is obviously connections to once again, to Watergate. The Inquirer is not named Inquirer for no reason. But on the other hand, it's also written by a British author, and British newspapers are notorious for a lot of interesting things when it comes to how to do business. And that I feel is important, because what the book shows at the end of its long discussion of all these themes is that because in good journalism done by people with integrity that are devoted to whatever the truth is, can do a lot of good. It can do damage in a lot of ways, and we see that as well when we have those interactions between Commander Vimes of the Watch and William de Worde, because the press and the justice system have different aims. They may be, and I think this is a really clever thing that Pratchett does there. There's a quote when they talk about it, is like when Vimes says to William de Worde, it's like, we're on the same side. And William says, no, we're not on the same side. We're on two sides that are next to each other right now. And that I think is really important, because there is always a tension between the press or media, which can be a free agent in a lot of ways, and, the actual justice system and so forth, which is more tightly connected to the state and to keep up the status quo and so forth. Now, where does all of this go, however? Well, the question is what we expect from our news. And the book does make it very clear that basically what we want from media is the confirmation of our own bias. The confirmation of our own biases is what actually sells, what makes media work. And that's the danger. That's why the Inquirer, with his conspiracy theories about alien abductions and all of that stuff, does sell so well, because it kind of confirms what people already expect, what people think in their heart of hearts, because the way we look at the world is, most of it is how we think the world works, and it is more or less informed by our own biases, by how we grew up, all these kind of things, these rumors and stuff that we already continuously talk to and so forth. That's the interesting part there, and that's why it works. Whereas things that go against our expectations, they're hard to swallow, whether we think that whether they're true or not. And at the end of the day, truth doesn't really come into it. That, I think, is part of the key here. That's why, conspiracies are so powerful. And we learn that basically, conspiracies tend to fail if the system works, which is exactly what happens here. But at the same time, it is very easy to assume conspiracies as well. And the trick of something like the Inquirer or other newspapers in that regard is, and other media nowadays, is exactly that. It's like you feed that expectation of conspiracy. Conspiracies, there's all kinds of psychological reasons why we think they're true, why we tend to fall down that hole. They're about wanting something concrete, a concrete answer to an abstract problem. But but claiming that can be very powerful, and it's when journalism loses that integrity by taking sides in a political struggle, when all of this can go so horribly, horribly wrong, which is already something you can see in this book. It really boils down to the integrity of the people working at the Times, because with that power they could do all kinds of harm. So yeah, let's try to tie this all up at the end. We learn that with this book, we learn that the power of media is extraordinary in a lot of ways by confirming or guiding our biases. It also very clearly exposes the disenfranchisement of a lot of people within society, because it's like, yeah, who cares about whether the people in power are innocent or not? It doesn't affect us down here. Which then, that apathy opens the gates for all kinds of people to, destroy democracy up there, because we can't do anything about it anyway. We also, once again, learn very much about, prejudice and how prejudice leads to all kinds of terrible things, because there is a lot of racism, speciesism going on there. We see people, and I think this is another one that I really want to point out, William being socialized in a very racist, elitist, privileged environment, constantly trying to overcome that. And it's important to understand that, right? We can't decide to no longer be racist. We can only try every single day to overcome these things. It's an ongoing struggle to not do the bad thing in every single moment. And the fact that Pratchett shows that, and it's not just one key moment, I think is really strong for something that is still written in the very early 2000s. So what does this all say? Is like, media is important for the running of the state. Unfortunately, it has to be principled media, and it's very difficult to judge that from the outside unless you really know how the media works. Fortunately, and I think this is why this book works so well, Terry Pratchett worked as a journalist for a long time, so a lot of the stuff around the press, all the pressures that journalisms are under to make money, to keep the thing going, to be there, to be the first, to, make it true for as long as it works. It only has to be true for today because we can correct it tomorrow. Dealing with small things like typos and all of that stuff. It feels authentic, of course. It also feels very heartfelt in a way that I really think makes journalists, good journalists, the heroes of this book, without actually, plastering over, wallpapering over the bad things on the dangers that are in there with journalism. So, yeah. What can I say? It's a fantastic book. It's even more relevant today. It picks up on so many small nuances of all the issues that we have nowadays, that it's just impressive to see how Pratchett, at the top of his game, could just pick up and craft all of that into a highly enjoyable story. And I haven't even started to talk about Harry King and all the jokes about that. I haven't even spoken about the wonderful, wonderful gags that are there for long time, the inside jokes that are there for a long time. Discworld readers, right? When we have the three things that William doesn't want to believe, which are that there is a talking dog, which we know there is, or that there is a werewolf in the Watch, which we know there is, or that there is the long-hidden heir to the throne of Ankh-Morpork, which we know there is. So the idea that sometimes our disbelief or journalistic prejudices can also lead to, ignoring facts because they're too outlandish. That part is also funny, and it gives you a lot of chuckles as a Discworld reader, because that stuff's true, but other people don't necessarily understand it. So yeah, I could gush for hours about this book because it is just so well nuanced. The way we get like a hint that the missing dog, Waffles, is hanging out with Foul or Run, because suddenly we have that same scene, which is, taking the sausage into pieces and handing one to the dog and one to himself. Suddenly he puts that thing into 3 pieces, and we're like, oh, what's going on there? And it's one of those things you overlook easily in your first or second read, but it's always there. That's pretty clever. There's also a probably first depiction, like the earliest depiction I ever came across, of someone with a dissociative identity disorder. In a way, it's not very subtle. It's not very, important or anything, but, Pratchett once again showing which kind of people are sort of outside of society and how to do that. And of course, there's a lot of really funny jokes about, well, sausages, about Pulp Fiction, about German philosophy. Probably the first Heidegger joke I've seen in a fantasy book, and it's a good one. And yeah, the whole idea of living up to stereotypes, or, well, undermining them, subverting them for your own ideas, it's all in there. It's just, I guess, one of the best Discworld novels in a lot of ways. And I really hope you enjoyed them as much as I did. I really hope you had a lot of fun with it. If you had so, let me know in the comments. If you really disliked it, let me know in the comments. If you have other things to complain about, let me know in the comments. And please subscribe, share, I don't know, do all those wonderful things. Maybe even give me money on Patreon. I would really appreciate that, because, doing this thing takes time and stuff. Anyway, have a great week. I'll talk to you very soon about other things, and until then, cheers.